there's a guest at Davos that really doesn't go along with that at all. Yeah, it's Donald Trump. And having given a big speech at Davos yesterday, well, he was up again today saying things. And the big debate today, it wasn't just Trump, you see, who was the big guest appearer. The other one was a British member of the royal family. No, not Prince Harry. He's in Vancouver. It was Prince Charles. And interestingly, we've had Donald Trump talking about Greta Thunberg, and we've also had Prince Charles meeting Greta Thunberg. And what I want to do is let's have a listen to Trump's thoughts on Greta, on climate change, on the approach we should be taking to CO2 emissions, and then we'll have a listen to Prince Charles's approach. And I'm going to ask you, which of these two men do you think is getting our approach to this right? So let's listen to Trump at Davos today when asked his thoughts on climate change and Greta.
I think that some people they put it at a level that is, unrealistic to a point you can't live your lives. We want to have the cleanest water on Earth. We want to have the cleanest air on Earth. Our numbers, as you saw, we had record numbers come out very recently. Our numbers are very, very good. Our environmental numbers, our water numbers, our numbers on air are tremendous. We have to do something about other continents. We have to do something about other countries. When we're clean and beautiful and everything's good, but you have another continent where the fumes are rising at levels that you can't believe. I think he's referring to China. I think Greta ought to focus on those places. But we are doing better right now than we've ever done in terms of cleanliness, in terms of numbers. We have a beautiful ocean called the Pacific Ocean, where thousands and thousands of tons of garbage flows toward us, and that's put there by other countries. So I think Greta has to start working on those other countries.
That was Trump on Greta. And let's just remind ourselves what Donald Trump said yesterday about the need for optimism in dealing with this issue.
This is not a time for pessimism. This is a time for optimism. Fear and doubt is not a good thought process, because this is a time for tremendous hope and joy and optimism and action. But to embrace the possibilities of tomorrow, we must reject the perennial prophets of doom and their predictions of the apocalypse. Today, I'm pleased to announce the United States will join 1 Trillion Trees initiative being launched here at the World Economic Forum. 1 trillion trees.
Well, that's something that I, as you know, on this show have been talking about for some time, and I was pleased about that. Now, today, Prince Charles was there, having met the great Greta. This is what he had to say about climate change. And bear in mind that he's a member of the royal family who are supposed to be apolitical.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, we are in the midst of a crisis that is now, I hope, well understood. Global warming, climate change, and the devastating loss of biodiversity are the greatest threats humanity has ever faced, and one largely of our own creation. It is time to level the playing field and to think about how we properly deploy taxes, policies and regulation in a way that catalyzes sustainable markets. Ladies and gentlemen, you all have a seat at the table, as this must be the year that we put ourselves on the right track. Everything I've tried to do and urge over the past 50 years has been done with our children and grandchildren in mind, because I did not want to be accused by them of doing nothing except prevaricate and deny the problem. Now, of course, they are accusing us of exactly that. So put yourselves in their position, ladies and gentlemen. We simply cannot waste any more time. The only limit is our willingness to act. And the time to act is now.
So the future king wants to put our taxes up. I'm not so sure that's a very clever thing for Prince Charles to do. But I will park that to one side. But there are two clear approaches. Trump says be optimistic, we can make things better, we ought to focus on China. Is very much what Trump is saying. And Prince Charles is saying we must put taxes up and we really have to be very worried and very scared. Now, actually, in a sense, both of them are saying we have to do something. It's just a question they've got very different approaches. Now, when it comes to Prince Charles, I do have form, because he came to the European Parliament 11 years ago, and I was in the front row, and I stood up when he came into the room. He then gave a speech saying that the European Union had to have more power, power to tax, power to limit CO2 emissions, because the North Pole would have disappeared within 7 years. Well, it's 11 years on, and it is still there, as far as I know. And I refused to stand at the end of Charles's speech, which led to a bit of a furore. But I refused to stand because I thought the future king was being too political. I wonder which approach is right. Who has got this right? Is Charles got it right with alarmism, or has Trump got it right with a degree of optimism and wanting to plant 1 trillion trees and asking China to look at its own problems? So we are talking about climate change. It is a hugely contentious issue. People care about it. What is the right approach? I have to say, if we really, really drill this down, since we've been talking about this in a huge way, and bear in mind, in 1989, the UN put out their first 11 years to save the world message. But since 2010, when this has been at every gathering of world leaders, the main subject of discussion, since 2010, CO2 emissions across the world have gone up by 11%. And do bear this in mind. China's CO2 emissions last year were greater than America, the European Union and Japan added together. And the real problem we've got here with, and I'm going to put this to you in my view, the real problem we've got here with loss of habitat, destructive effects on biodiversity, and all of these problems with carbon emissions or whatever else you want to worry about in the world is simply because the global population is exploding. It's the biggest problem that we face.
Hello and welcome back to Royal Sussex Squad. Donald Trump and King Charles, two men with wildly different views on climate change, went head-to-head at Davos, and the comparisons are too juicy to ignore. Now you already know that when it comes to King Charles, the royal family, and their so-called political neutrality, there's always something to unpack. Trump, never one to shy away from a mic, took centre stage and did what he does best, dismiss concerns and paint himself as the hero. He confidently declared that the United States is leading the world in environmental quality, despite what critics say. He talked about how America has the cleanest air and water, emphasizing his administration's efforts and, of course, pointed fingers at China and other nations, accusing them of being the real polluters. He basically told Greta Thunberg to go lecture them instead, dismissing her concerns as misplaced and overly dramatic. Oh, and he threw in some optimism, because according to him, worrying about the planet is just being a prophet of doom. He assured his audience that everything is under control and there's no need for alarm. Meanwhile, King Charles, our so-called apolitical monarch, was on the same stage but singing a completely different tune. He was all about urgency, regulation and, wait for it, taxes. Because in his words, we must deploy taxes, policies and regulation to tackle climate change. Sound familiar? That's right, Charles has been on this environmental crusade for over 50 years, tirelessly advocating for the planet long before it became a mainstream concern. And he's been using his royal platform to push political agendas, leveraging his influence to bring attention to critical environmental issues, despite the royal family supposedly staying out of politics. His actions have often sparked debates about the role of the monarchy in political discourse. Now, let's not forget that this isn't new behavior for Charles. His commitment to the environment has been unwavering and consistent. 11 years ago, he stood before the European Parliament demanding more power for the EU to tax and regulate in the name of climate action. His speech was a bold call to action, urging leaders to take immediate steps. Back then, he warned that the North Pole would vanish within 7 years. Spoiler alert, it's still there. His prediction may not have come true, but it certainly raised awareness. But what's interesting is how he keeps making these bold claims while still living an ultra-luxurious lifestyle, flying private jets and maintaining a level of opulence that seems at odds with his environmental message, and sitting on a literal throne of privilege. This juxtaposition raises questions about the balance between advocacy and personal lifestyle choices. And let's not pretend that Charles is the only one in that royal camp pushing a political agenda. Remember when Meghan and Harry spoke about climate action, racial justice and mental health? The British press had a meltdown. Royals must stay out of politics, they screamed. But when Charles does it, crickets. Double standards, much? So here's the big question. Do we need optimism, as Trump suggests, to inspire hope and drive positive change, or action and taxation, as Charles insists, to enforce stricter regulations and ensure compliance? Because while politicians debate and discuss their differing viewpoints, CO2 emissions have still gone up by 11% since 2010, showing no signs of slowing down. And let's be real. The biggest elephant in the room is the ever-growing global population, which continues to put immense pressure on our planet's resources, and the lack of real accountability for major polluters who contribute significantly to the environmental crisis we face today. What do you think? Are we buying what Charles is selling, or is he just another royal playing politics when it suits him? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also hit the comments and let's keep the conversation going.